Hi guys, welcome to Office Blokes Reacts. I am a Ginger Simplified.
I'm Office Bloke Mike.
I am the chief sommelier.
Of where?
The office.
Within a half an hour radius of the office.
Just in our office.
Have we ever mentioned that we are the single fastest growing YouTube reaction channel
in our office?
Within a half mile of our office.
I wouldn't go half a mile, I'd probably bring it in a little bit, probably like 200 metres.
Well, they film...
Bring it in a bit less.
They film quite a well-known reality TV show around here, and I can vouch for the fact that we get more views than they do.
We do, actually. You're
I'm
right.
not going to say what it is. People can probably guess. You'll find out next year.
When Dave's on it. Dating one of the women.
Yeah, I fucked up big time. She treated me right. The oversimplified videos were a Patreon request originally. The American
Shannon.
Civil War.
Yeah.
Shannon
Legier.
Cheers, Shannon. We appreciate the support.
Shannon. Indeed.
You've got us down a rabbit hole here, which is like amazing. And we did World War II Oversimplified Part 1, because that usually comes before Part 2.
It does.
Well,
It's usually about
It's usually the logic there.
Yep.
I have spent my life watching World War II documentaries. Like it's a big thing for me. I absolutely love it. I think you've got to remember it, otherwise it'll...
Mike was in it.
Yeah.
He was. He was, absolutely.
Good job, I've got a sense of humour in it.
About 35, weren't you, when you went to war?
Yeah, I know, you're pretty old for it.
But I'd actually just retired from my job when
Yeah, he's a retired general. He's 60.
brought me back specially.
Yeah. But no, I think, like, I've been out with people before where I've been watching World War II documentaries and they've gone, why do you watch this? It's so depressing. And I go, if we don't watch this, it will happen again. I absolutely guarantee the fact that if you forget about this, which people will without documentaries and all that sort of stuff, it doesn't take much for people to slip into that sort of behaviour again.
Definitely, yeah.
And that's that. I'm a big sort of champion of remembering this stuff.
I mean, the thing is, it's absolutely massively interesting as well, isn't it?
Oh, it's
obviously it is horrific, but it's really interesting as well. Some of the things that happened, and
it's crazy, isn't it? Such a pivotal point in our history as well.
What should we watch it then? Seems to be rambling on.
This is a
babbling on about shite. Let's watch it.
This is a new Office Blokes discuss World War II with me and Mike.
We're not reacting to the video.
During the war.
During the war.
So what else is happening? Well, when I said Britain was all alone, that wasn't entirely true.
Oh,
Many Commonwealth nations and other allied colonies had joined the war in Britain's support. They would play a key role throughout the war, particularly in the African and Italian campaigns. On the Axis side, Germany, Italy, and Japan signed the defensive tripartite pact, bringing their military alliance even closer together. The Soviet Union's war against Finland should have been an easy victory, but it became a humiliating struggle, and their military ineptitude was put on full display. In the end, they did force the Finns to sue for peace. Then, they continued their honorable campaign of pushing around much smaller countries by annexing the Baltic states and part of northern Romania. France's colonies in equatorial Africa were like, heck no, we aren't going to join the Germans, and they all pledged their allegiance to free France, except for Gabon, which had to be taken by military force. The Allies also tried to capture the strategic port of Dakar, but that ended in failure. Mussolini had seen Hitler's successes, and he thought now it was Italy's time to shine, so he tried to take British Somaliland, and that went pretty well. Then he tried to take Egypt, and that went less well. Then he tried to take Greece, and that went really badly. Churchill began referring to Italy as Europe's soft underbelly. He began favoring a military campaign from the south and started sending British troops to Greece. All of this had Hitler pretty concerned, and he moved to...
Someone commented on my pausing abilities today, actually. I can't remember what I was going to say. Yeah, I was going to say the Italians are sat around drinking espressos and stuff they're not bothered about.
Waving their arms around.
Yeah, all this war and shit.
Protect his southern flank. He had been getting friendly with Hungary and twisted their arm into signing the Tripartite Pact and joining the Axis powers. Romania was also eager to join for protection against the Soviet Union. The Tripartite Pact was designed to prevent any other countries from deciding to join the Allies, specifically Britain's old ally, the pesky United States of America. When war first broke out, American public opinion was strongly against joining in. In 1940, there was an election. The Republican candidate said, "I will not send any young Americans to die in Europe," and sitting President Franklin D. Roosevelt said, "I will also not send any young Americans to die in Europe. Unless I have to, then I might." And Roosevelt
just send the old ones then.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, they can fight.
Anyone?
Churchill asked him to join the war, but Roosevelt said, "No can do, Winston, but you know what? Here, have some weapons." America began supplying the Allies with food and munitions, but there was one problem. German U-boats were sinking thousands of Allied supply ships in the Atlantic, including American ones. If the Germans could sever Britain's supply line, the UK would starve. Throughout the war, the Allies had to come up with better technology to fight the U-boats. Improved radar, aircraft with longer range, better weaponry and convoy tactics. At one point, a man even called a meeting and said, "Pykrete, you take some wood, you take some ice, you put them together, you get pykrete." And then he pulled out a gun and shot some wood and it shattered. And then he shot some pykrete and the bullet ricocheted off it and hit someone else in the conference room. Then they tried to make a pykrete aircraft carrier, but that idea was scrapped because that's a really dumb idea. In the end, Alan Turing and his team of codebreakers cracked Germany's Enigma code, and the
Alan Turing, got to say, special shout out, Manchester.
He is.
Yep.
City's football ground. Give City a shout out. Running alongside it, Alan Turing Way.
Yeah. I went to college at City College in Manchester, which is the corner of Sackville Street and Canal Street, of all places.
Mike's hangout.
Yep. I spotted Mike there quite a few times, but there's a statue of Alan Turing in the sort of grounds of the college. He invented modern day computing, didn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Absolute legend. Tragic story, but
Yeah.
I'm sure OverSimplified can do a video on this story.
but gradually became less and less of a threat. Back in Africa, Britain decided to push Italy out of Egypt. Hey, that was pretty easy, so they kept going. Hitler realized he was going to have to finally step in and do something. He went to Bulgaria and Yugoslavia and said, "Hey, I'm going to move troops through you to get to Greece, so either join us or, be invaded." Bulgaria opted to join them. Yugoslavia opted to be invaded. Then Greece finally fell to the joint German...
Opted to be invaded. Invade us. There you go.
It was funny, this guy.
My kids are like 16th Yugoslavian or something. So
You've got all kinds of mixing you, haven't you?
not on my side.
Oh, not on your side. Oh, the crazy side.
On the naughty side. Yeah.
Italian invasion. The British had moved troops from North Africa to fight in Greece, which helped Rommel and his tank divisions push the British back to Egypt, and they could have kept going, but a small, mostly Australian force held out under siege for 8 months in Tobruk, denying the Germans a strategic port city and disrupting their supply line. Despite having some success in the Middle East, the British didn't seem like any real threat for now. Hey, Soviet Union, look out! With 3 million troops, Hitler launched the...
Of all the dumb things Hitler did, and he did some horrible, deplorable, disgusting things, the dumbest by far was to try and invade Russia. They take up like a third of the world's landmass.
It wasn't a good move, was it, for him at the time?
They were an ally to him at this point as
Yeah.
well. If he would have just gone, all right, guys, we're going to do our thing, you're going to do your thing, they probably would have won the war. It's crackers, isn't it? Absolutely crackers.
Well, he's a crackers person,
Thank God he was a nut job with delusions of grandeur.
Yeah, exactly.
largest ground invasion in history, and Stalin was far from ready. Both Churchill and Roosevelt had warned him of an impending attack, but he dug his head in the sand and the Soviets didn't stand a chance. Germany made staggering progress, with huge encircling movements capturing mind-boggling numbers of Russian troops. 250,000 at Bialystok, Minsk, 300,000 at Smolensk, nearly 700,000 at Kiev, and again at Vyazma and Bryansk. Leningrad was put under a siege that would last an insufferable 4 years. The invasion of Russia had been Hitler's main ideological goal from the beginning, and his hatred for the ethnic peoples there was now unleashed in all its fury. The Eastern Front of the Second World War was brutal for all that endured it. The Germans were now inside of Moscow, and that's it. It's all over. But then it happened. It got cold. Stupid cold. Hitler had hoped the Soviets would give up before winter, but they kept fighting. His commanders came to him and said, "Can we please dig in for the winter and wait until spring?" "No, keep going." "But oil is literally freezing inside our vehicles." "That's fine, keep going." "We're having to leave the corpses of our frozen horses by the side of the road so we can still find our way in the snowdrift." "Perfectly normal, keep going." Hitler hadn't given his millions of men winter clothing and supplies because he thought he really should have won by now. Then, Stalin called in troops from the Siberian front, specially trained to fight in the extreme cold, and the Germans were no match. They were now being pushed back. They had no choice but to dig in and wait for winter to end. Germany's victories were staggering, and Japan was eager not to miss the victory bus. Their war in China had come to a standstill, but they wanted to keep expanding their sphere of influence and getting those sweet, sweet raw materials. They began making plans to expand southward, but there was a problem. Southeast Asia was heavily colonized by America and Great Britain. It was also full of ocean. Ocean meant naval combat, and there was no way the Japanese Navy could stand up to the US and the UK. So they thought, wouldn't it be nice if we could destroy their navies before we begin our conquest? And so it was. On December 7, 1941, the Japanese launched a surprise air raid on the US Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor and inflicted a huge amount of damage. They also attacked British colonies in Southeast Asia. Roosevelt had no choice but to declare war on Japan, and so did Churchill. Hitler then declared war on America, even though he totally didn't have to. The attack on Pearl Harbor seemed like a big Japanese victory, but they didn't attack any of the naval repair yards, fuel storage tanks, or the submarine base, meaning the Pacific Fleet would be up and running again pretty soon.
I'm not a conspiracy guy, but do you think Pearl Harbor was what they call a false flag nowadays? Well, not a false flag is when you do it on yourself, I think. But do you think the American higher-ups knew about Pearl Harbor was about to happen? Because there's all these things of they knew 2 hours before there was messages that were never read. That one thing was that significant that it got America into the war, and it essentially won World War II, Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
America.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
The kind of greater good justified the sacrifice, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
I genuinely think it was.
I'm not convinced by that. I mean, because they would have been justified by joining the war anyway without Pearl Harbor.
But the American public
surely
didn't want to join the war. Maybe the politicians wanted to help out people.
Oh, right. So they need
the public did not want to go to
like
war.
a reason, like visual reason to.
And then suddenly you've killed our boys.
Yeah.
So we're going to war.
Yeah, I don't know. I really don't know. I have to look at. Yeah.
Well, it's never been proven either way, but I think it was personally.
Meantime, though, the Japanese were able to begin their conquest. They took Guam, the Gilbert Islands, Wake Island, Hong Kong, and the Philippines. They forced Thailand to join them so they could march their troops through to Malaya. They swept through Singapore, North Borneo, the East Indies, New Guinea, the Solomons, and they were now threatening northern Australia and the borders of India. Japan's victory had been as staggering as the Germans, and it reinforced the Japanese idea that this was a divine war which they were destined to win. But their victories had been based on speed, not power, and power would eventually catch up with them. For now, though, in all occupied nations, the people suffered. Persecution, forced labor, harsh punishments for any who spoke out against their occupiers. In Europe, the Nazis were rounding up ethnic minorities and other unwanted groups and individuals. In particular, millions of Jewish people would suffer through the terrible events of the Holocaust. Brave resistance movements rose up in defiance of their invaders, while the people held out for hope. And hope was coming. Winter was over, and Hitler could continue his push eastward. But this time, he switched up his strategy. He wanted to focus on the south. His plan was to cut off the Russian armies in the Caucasus, an area full of oil, and then invade the Caucasus and take all the oil. His forces moved across the north with ease, and Hitler got cocky. He rerouted the 4th Panzer Army south early, leaving the 6th Army to complete the encircling movement alone. To do so, the 6th Army had to reach and take the key Soviet city of Stalingrad. The Russians defended it fiercely, and Stalingrad saw some of the harshest fighting of the entire war. The Soviets held up the German advance for 5 months as they battled in the war-torn city, which bought them valuable time. When the Germans had first launched their invasion a year earlier, the Soviets had moved their factories to the east. Those factories had been building a butt-ton of tanks and aircraft and getting the Soviet army up to scratch. Now, it was ready. Stalin gathered his new and improved forces around the city, and in an attack that resembled Hitler's own encirclement tactics, they began surrounding the 6th Army. Hitler's commanders came to him and said, "Hey, maybe we should retreat." But Hitler said, "No, you stay." The entire 6th Army was trapped and had to surrender. With complete air superiority, the Soviets started pushing westward. For Stalin, it was a resounding victory. For Hitler, an absolute catastrophe. Things also weren't looking too good for Hitler elsewhere. With America now in the war, Allied bombing over German cities reached devastating levels. In Africa, the British had pushed Rommel back again. Then they were pushed back again, and finally, after a decisive battle at El Alamein, and with American and British troops arriving in the west, the Germans and Italians were squeezed out of Africa. Japan was also already seeing its rapid success being turned around. They attempted to take the island of Midway, but the US Navy was ready for the attack, and they sank Japan's carrier. Actually, they sank a lot of them. It was a battle from which the Japanese Navy would never recover. British, Indian, and Chinese troops held the line in the harsh jungle terrain of Burma, and the Japanese suffered losses in the Solomon Islands and New Guinea. They began to realize they were not invincible. With the Axis out of Africa, the Allies had to decide their next move. Churchill still wanted to attack from the south, while the Americans preferred a full sea invasion in northern France. "All right," said the Americans, "we'll do it your way." Allied forces successfully landed in Sicily and began moving north. They also carried out bombing raids over Rome. The thing was, many of the people in Sicily had relatives living in America, and they greeted the American troops quite warmly. With the war reaching home territory, most Italians just weren't that into it, and Mussolini was suddenly very unpopular. He was voted out by his own fascist Grand Council and was toppled from power. Italy immediately began negotiations for surrender. Hitler wasn't surprised and had already sent reinforcements southward. In an operation he ironically called Operation Axis, German troops quickly disarmed Italian troops in the north. The Allies continued fighting the Germans up through Italy, but then winter set in, meaning mud, and everything slowed to a halt. "Alright," said the Americans, "let's do it our way as well." Germany had made itself a lot of enemies, and millions of Allied troops had been gathering in England as factories worked around the clock producing the war material needed for a super crazy massive the likes of which the world has never seen before invasion of Europe. The Germans knew an Allied invasion would come, but they didn't know where it would land. Thanks to Allied deception tactics, they thought there was a pretty good chance it would come at Calais, but the Allies were really going to land in Normandy because it was less fortified and the beaches were nicer. Under the careful planning of General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the invasion that had been long in the making was just about ready to go. Just one thing was preventing the launch: the British weather. For a short while, everyone sat around waiting for a decent day, and then it came. On the night of June 5th, over 1,000 bombers took off and raided coastline defenses, while paratroopers were dropped inland in a bit of a chaotic operation, tasked with sabotaging defenses and capturing key bridges to stop any German reinforcements from reaching the beaches. Early the next morning, the barrage came, as Allied ships fired a huge number of shells at the German fortifications, and then the landings. The Americans at Utah and Omaha, the British at Golden Sword, and the Canadians at Juneau. It was a tremendous struggle with a great loss of life, particularly at Omaha, but the Allied troops captured the beaches and the landings were a success. Then they began their movements inland. They took the port of Cherbourg and the city of Caen. The Americans moved south to capture Brittany. Then, in a massive disaster for the Germans, British and Canadian troops from the north and Americans from the south trapped the German 7th Army in a near wipeout encircling movement. In August, Allied troops landed in the south of France to little resistance. On one beach, all they found was a Frenchman handing out champagne. Paris was liberated and the Germans were pushed out of France as the Allies entered Belgium. In the Far East, the Allies started to push the Japanese out of Burma, as the Americans launched a two-pronged offensive in the Pacific. In the south, General MacArthur led the push to liberate the Philippines, while General Nimitz oversaw the brutal island-hopping campaign. American forces had to make hard-fought landing after hard-fought landing on fiercely defended small islands as they moved steadily towards the Japanese.
Makes you wonder when you look at it on a map like that. Why not bypass the island? I know there's,
Isolate it, you mean?
yeah, I know there's strategic points where there's military bases and there's probably runways and stuff like that, but the fighting in the Pacific for the Americans was worse than it was in Europe for in Europe for us. Some of these tiny little islands cost so much life; it's unbelievable. Just fucking go around it, isolate the
Infrastructure,
cut off the supply lines. They're fucked.
I think maybe that's part of it, the like supply lines, because these distances are probably quite vast, aren't they? Really, the big distances. So maybe it is like a supply line type of thing, With
well, if you bypass that island and you just go to the next one, you can with the Navy you can cut off the supply lines.
Yeah, there must have been. Obviously, there's a good reason for it, otherwise I'm sure they wouldn't have bothered. But
it was hard fighting for the Americans in the Pacific.
Yeah.
Mainland. The Japanese believed that the greatest thing a person could do was to die in battle, and the most dishonorable act was to surrender. As a result, they fought ferociously to the very end, and the closer the Americans got to the mainland, the more ferocious the resistance became. In February 1945, the Americans captured the island of Iwo Jima, and an intense firebombing campaign of Japan's wooden cities began. The Allies suffered some setbacks trying to liberate the Netherlands.
Have you ever seen that thing of the soldiers putting the flag up on Iwo Jima?
Yeah.
Might be bro science or not, I don't know. It's not. I'm not going to verify it, but apparently that was staged. The soldiers that actually did it were Native Americans that put the flag up, and they had to stage it because it'd blow people's minds if it was Native Americans doing it, and have to get some nice white soldiers in to raise the flag up. Apparently,
I think I've heard that story before.
Yeah, because there's statues of it, and it's a really iconic thing. Raising the flag on Iwo Jima.
Interesting.
Apparently so.
But they were making progress and were now threatening the industrial heartland of Germany. Hitler's health, both mentally and physically, was rapidly deteriorating. Things were looking bad, and he was desperate. He said, "We need to turn this thing around, and I've just the trick. Remember a few years back when we blitzkrieged through the Ardennes and trapped the Allied forces in Belgium? Well, I'm going to do the exact same thing. Again." He gathered his forces and tried to pound them through the Ardennes. He used up the remainder of Germany's strength and resources, and he managed to create quite a nice bulge. He also trapped some American forces in the Belgian town of Bastogne. The Germans sent the trapped Americans a message saying surrender or be annihilated. When it was read out to the commanding officer, he said, "They want to surrender? No, sir, they want us to surrender." Nuts! And that's what they sent off as their official reply. General Patton's Third Army then managed to break the siege from the southwest, and the Germans were pushed back. Hitler's last-ditch attempt had failed, and what followed was a total collapse of the German forces. The Allies pushed into Germany from both sides. The Soviet Union took Warsaw and kept pushing to Berlin. In his bunker, Hitler realized all hope was lost. Berlin fell, and with it, Hitler's dreams of a great German empire. 2 of the Axis nations had been knocked out. 1 to go. The Americans began their assault on Okinawa, the last island before they would reach the Japanese mainland. The desperate Japanese fought hard, launching kamikaze attacks on the US ships. The citizens of Okinawa suffered through the terrible fighting, but in 2 months, the island was captured. The Allies now had to make a choice. Either continue the devastating struggle up the Japanese mainland, or they could try to coerce the Japanese into surrendering now. In July, the first successful atomic bomb test took place in New Mexico, and the destructive weapon was ready for use. America and the UK were also seeing the Soviet Union not so much liberating as occupying its captured territories, and so they wanted to put on a show of force. On August 6th, the A-bomb fell on Hiroshima. Then, on the 9th, Nagasaki. The cities were reduced to rubble, and for the people living there, it was a terrible fate. But for the Allies, it achieved their main aim. In September, the Emperor announced Japan's surrender, saying the war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. After 6 years, war was finally over. The Allies occupied Japan for 8 years. The Emperor was allowed to keep his position, but General MacArthur made sure this picture was printed in the Japanese press, to display to the Japanese people that their Emperor was not the divine, powerful being they had believed. Germany was divided between America, the UK, France, and the Soviet Union. In 1949, the Allied sectors were united into West Germany. The Second World War had been more terrible and destructive than the First. In its aftermath, 2 major superpowers with 2 very different ideologies had come out victorious, and the tension between the 2 of them would create a new kind of war. A very, very cold one. Oh, Churchill, that looks just like me. And your app is doing really well. And this quesadilla you made is to die for. How'd you learn to do all this stuff? I used the link in the description to get...
Hey, very good.
Amazing segue. It's as usual, it's probably one of the most interesting topics out there because it's so diverse, isn't it?
What, making quesadillas?
Yeah. I make a good quesadilla. You're not. Pulled pork, bit of cheese.
Yeah.
No, I just
Great video though.
It's sort of unbelievable. It shows how absurd it actually is when you see a map of the whole world and what people were doing to each other.
Yeah.
I hope it never happens again.
Well,
I
look at
think
the
it
numbers
will.
as well. Is it 50 to 80 million people?
It's more than that.
Yeah, I mean,
It's more than that.
It's going to be more, isn't it?
This is,
So it's
without a doubt, it's more
absolutely
than that.
unbelievable.
Especially when they went into Eastern Europe, there was no census. You know, there was no people aren't registered.
Yeah, true.
You know, the numbers are estimated at, in the hundreds of millions. When you look how big Russia is and the atrocities that happen there. One of my favourite movies is Defiance.
Oh yeah,
and it's the partisans in I think it's in Poland. It's based. But it's Daniel Craig of all people. He plays the main guy in it. And it's basically them fighting off the Germans from they flee to the woods, and it's loads of sort of I think Polish Jews.
Yeah,
and it's their offensive back, and he saves all these people. It's based on a real story. But it's amazing. Saves thousands of people and like shoots the shit out of some Nazis.
Yeah, I have to keep an eye out for that. Not seen that one before, but
it's an interesting take, isn't it, for people to understand a bit more of the modern history.
I think when you simplify it, you see how absurd it actually is.
It does make it seem more absurd, doesn't it? You know,
because you're going, well, why the fuck? What was the point?
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Exactly. What's the point in all that? You know, it's crazy stuff.
I don't think humans evolve anywhere near as fast as technology and things do. So I think like people think we've got iPhones and shit, so we're all evolved. I think we're the exact same people that we were when this was happening. Genuinely do. I think it takes thousands of years, or hundreds of years at least, for humans to evolve in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah,
but the thing is about it, though, is Germany's my favourite country to go and visit now.
And they make great cars.
I love going to Germany. I've been all over Germany. I absolutely love it.
Yeah,
and I've got friends who are German, and it's
very clean. No one talks back.
I love it. Love going there.
Love the Christmas time there, don't you? All the
do.
German
The Christmas
markets and
markets,
everything
yeah.
like that.
I've
ones.
never been.
No, I haven't.
I've been that far away from Germany when I flew to Switzerland, Grenoble, is it?
Yeah.
Where the German border is literally there. But that's the closest I've got. And the German market's in Manchester. That's the closest.
Called Christmas markets, not the German markets.
When they started off, they were the German markets. And then when they realised that we can milk a load of people for a shitload of cash, it became
the Christmas markets.
But originally it was all bratwurst and German beers and stuff.
Yeah. Well, I think you still get that, don't you? But
you do, but it's expensive.
Yeah.
I love it, mate. I love going to Germany.
I used to live right next to it, and I went there one night and I was paying we're talking like 12 years ago, 13 years ago. I was paying about £5.50 a beer. Didn't think about it. I met my bro who was living in Manchester at the time. And then I looked up and it was the bar I was drinking at was JW Lee's. It's a Manchester brewery. So because even though I'm in the German markets, I'm drinking at the Manchester bar, drinking the Manchester beers. Like £1.80.
German prices.
German prices. I was fuming. I was like, it's a good job we bloody won the war. I would have been really upset.
Anyway, hope you guys like that too. Don't forget like and subscribe, and we'll catch you guys on the next one.
Cheers guys.